So today we're going to talk about intentional hybrid project management. I got to tell you, I don't really like the word hybrid. And it was funny. Yesterday morning, I was talking to someone, and they're like, "Oh, you're talking about hybrid. Is this hybrid, remote versus in-person work?" And so my dislike of the word hybrid actually has nothing to do with project management. It actually has to do with bicycling. So about 30 years ago, my son was born. And at the time I was running triathlons. I was like, I want to be able to train with my son. So I got a jog stroller and I got this burly trailer. And I was like, what am I going to do in terms of what am I going to pull that with? Like, I can't use my race bike. My race bike, it's fast, it's cool, it's sleek. It's like having a sports car. So a guy that I was riding with, I said, Barry, what should I get? He said, well, Alan, you could get a mountain bike. And a mountain bike's like having a Jeep. It's also cool, it's rough, it's rugged. He said, but if you get a hybrid, it's probably a lot more practical, but that's like having a Prius. There's nothing cool about having a Prius. So of course I got in the mountain bike. But that brings me to my big first takeaway that for the presentation, which is as project managers, rather than focusing on being cool, because of course we're the coolest profession, we really want to focus on being pragmatic, doing things that make sense, that are the best choices. So when we look at our projects and our ability to effectively execute projects, data's not that good. You look at the chaos data, the standards report group data, and about 10 to 15% of projects outright failures, about half of our projects, on time, on budget, not really great either. And another interesting fact is that our approaches that we use to our project management don't really seem to make a huge dent, which I thought was really interesting. So today we're going to talk about intentional hybrid project management. And I make hybrid small because one of the things we'll talk about is I think pretty much all of our projects are hybrid these days. And that was, one of the things that Mark Lyons talked about yesterday as well. So let's just get some definitions out on the table. First, intentionality. We're doing things on purpose. We're being deliberate. We're being very thoughtful about what we do. And the definition of hybrid is pretty loose. It's pretty open. We're just using a combination of different elements, different sets of practices. And so I think the word hybrid, or I sort of date the word hybrid project management back to 2019, when PMI changed the PMP exam, and half the questions were going to be predictive, and roughly a quarter of the questions were going to both be agile and hybrid. But the interesting thing is, when you look at the Google search traffic back then, everybody was still talking about agile. Barely anybody was talking about hybrid. And so, as much to my chagrin, when last year I cracked open the Pulse of the Profession report, all of a sudden, hybrid's going up, agile's going down. And when we look at the search traffic again, we also see that there's almost a doubling of the search traffic for hybrid. So I got really interested in this. And as Damien mentioned, I've been writing articles about project management now for over a decade. So I got really excited, and I wrote 4 different articles about hybrid because there's really not a whole lot of literature out there. What is hybrid? What do we really mean by that? So when we talk about our predictive projects really come from construction and the defense industry. And so here we're doing our big upfront planning. Our engineers, our architects lay out everything that we're going to do. We've got our delivery at the end, and we typically use top-down management approaches. My son-in-law actually is a big construction project manager downtown, builds big buildings, and you've got your core of specialists, your subcontractors that come through and work on the various aspects. And if you're doing a construction project, it's really making sure that you're coordinating those different pieces together. And when we look at project management, a lot of our standard practices, PERT charts, critical path, all came out of defense projects in the 50s. And so we talk about the waterfall approach. Winston Royce coined that term for project management back in 1970. He talked about this beautiful cascade of sequencing processes. which was on the first or second page of the article. Unfortunately, nobody really ever got to the third or fourth page of the articles, because Royce also said that we really need feedback loops. And when you start adding those feedback loops into our projects, it begins to look a lot like Agile, doesn't it? So we talk about Agile, and Agile became a thing, became actually named in 2001. But people were doing Agile things before that. I was doing Agile projects starting back in the 80s. I just didn't know it. But here we're really focusing on our iterative and our incremental delivery. So we're going to deliver things periodically in small pieces. We're going to iterate through, and we're going to use the feedback to inform what we do in the future, either to correct things that didn't make sense or to be like, hey, that was a really good idea. Maybe we should do more of that. And with our on Agile, we're also doing knowledge work. We're dealing with complex problems where it's not really easy to lay out what the solution is. So rather than the project manager or the project team being specialists that just do their pieces, we're focusing on having our empowered, self-organizing, self-managing teams, because we want to unlock the creative energies and the creative wisdom of the teams. And so it's really interesting. I teach classes regularly at the National Institutes of Health. I talk to them about Agile, and they're like, oh, this is just the application of the scientific method or the scientific approach to business problems. I'm like, exactly. So Agile. So I think Mark said yesterday there was over 120 different Agile methodologies or frameworks out there. So Agile is really not a specific way of doing things. Agile was defined 20 years ago as a set of values and principles. And they were great, but it's not like they were on stone tablets that came down. You know, they're being changed. We can look at things differently, but they're values that we want to have. So people talk about a spectrum of practices where on the one side, you've got predictive. On the other side, you've got Agile, like it's this huge tug of war, and everything in the middle is hybrid. But I don't think that's really a great way to think about what we do, because it's not a linear choice. It's not A or B, because it also leaves out lean and Kanban practices. And so lean, mostly associated with, or originally associated with Toyota and the Toyota production system, the idea of reducing waste, delivering value, and Kanban, improving our flow. And so when we think about lean and Kanban, it's also a set of principles, and there's many ways that we do it. You can see the House of Lean. SAFe has that House of Lean. I've seen different versions of it, but they're all basically the same, where we're focusing on delivering value quickly, eliminating waste, and waste are things that don't provide value to our customers. And when we think about the things that we do, particularly for those of us that work in large enterprise environments or work for the government or do work with the government, we know there's a lot of waste out there. But another major part is the idea of continuous improvement. Not just improving the products that we're delivering, but also continuously improving the process that we're following. So I prefer to think of project management not as a spectrum, as a bipolar thing, but as a palette of choices. And just as painters mix colors to make beautiful art, as project managers, we can mix practices to increase the likelihood of our project success. And so we can think of projects that are hybrid, but lean a little bit more towards the predictive side, or projects that are hybrid, but a little bit more agile. And so we see these patterns out there in the wild. You know, the idea of doing design, build, construction. It's been around since the 80s or so. And so the classic way of building something is you go out, you hire your architects and your engineers, they give you your plans, you bid it out, and the construction company builds it. But what we find is that when we combine the design and build under a single firm, it reduces the loss of information through the communication. It reduces risks, often leads to projects being delivered sooner, and ultimately results in happier customers. And even though back in the 1970s, everybody was talking about Royce's waterfall, we were also doing joint application development sessions where we bring the users and the developers together to figure out what the solution was, because you needed that feedback. And then there's organizations, there's ways of embedding agile practices in what we do. Beginning to use flow, beginning to use Kanban, and Kanban works great in just about everything. The idea of making our products customer-centric, really focusing on what the customer needs are. I do a lot of consulting work, and you go out, you talk to people, and we're doing Agile, but we're doing Agile, and particularly in this area, we have a fixed set of requirements. We're doing a fixed price, fixed delivery contract. Okay, that's what you're stuck with. You work within those parameters. Or we're Agile, but we haven't changed essentially the way we work. When I mean the way we work, the management approach. We haven't changed the culture of our organization. So it might be still, an environment of fear, or it might be top-down command and control. I'm the boss, I tell you what to do. Or we could have matrix teams. We see this a lot, where we've got, rather than having our small dedicated teams, we've got folks that are working on multiple projects. Or we've got non-agile roles. And that's where we've got product owners that were the business analysts that understand the system, but they really don't have that product vision. Or we have the functional manager who half the time puts on the hat as the scrum master, tells people what to do as well. And so we see these patterns out in the wild. So that brings us to my third takeaway. We don't want to be binary. We don't want to just think about our world as being predictive or agile. We really want to think about, well, what are the patterns of practice that we may see? And there's different ways of thinking about understanding our projects and the type of approaches that we may do. One of the ways I like to think about it is to think about the cost of change versus the clarity of need. So if we're building a building, cost of change is high. Once you've dug the foundation and started pouring cement, that's not the time to figure out, well, we should have been 10 feet over to the right. So we have a high clarity of needs. We've got our specifications, our blueprints, and we can execute against that. Software. Software, if we are involved and we've got our users and our customers involved in the development process, the cost of change is low. And we don't have to have a high clarity of needs, because we've all been, for those of us that are in tech, I'll know it when I see it. Or these are the specifications, and now I'm showing you that screen that was built to those specifications. They're like, not really what I had in mind. So Agile, and particularly our continuous integration, continuous delivery approaches work really well there. Kanban, to me, works really well in any environment as a supplement, or even as its own standalone process. Another way of thinking about it is the Stacy model. And the Stacy model is where we're thinking about the complexity where our problem is well understood and the solution is well understood. Traditional is just fine. We don't need to go through the overhead of the process of getting feedback, because people, I want to add this column to the report and I want it to multiply that by pi r squared. Boom, great. And then where we have our complex problems, and complex problems are defined by, we are not really sure what we want. And as we approach that solution, things can change. And Agile works well there. Agile, Scrum in particular, was built for handling complex adaptive problems, because we want that feedback. And so we want to deliver things quickly to get that feedback. Professor Nieto Rodriguez, who wrote the Harvard Business Review's project management guide, came up with a different model where we can score either a project or a phase of the project by these different factors in order to determine whether or not we should be using Agile, hybrid, or a waterfall or predictive approach. And so DA takes you through a decision tree. And DA is approach agnostic. So it could be that the right approach would be to be predictive, or it could be that a Scrum-like approach or a Kanban-like approach would make most sense. Or it's that we've got a mature enough organization to be able to support this, and we need to be able to support that continuous delivery. And so this is yet a different approach in terms of how do we get to where we want to be. So we want to think not about, our projects being monolithic, but what are some of the patterns of practice that we see? And so it might be we have a water scrumfall. And we're going to go through our predictive planning process. We're going to outline our requirements, but then we're going to iterate through the solution. And then we're going to deliver everything at once. And a lot of times I'll talk to people and they'll be like, yes, we're translating our requirements into user stories. Okay, does that really add value? But if it does, great. We can also see Scrumfall. And this is where we are combining Scrum and waterfall practices in terms of our development approach. Microsoft used this when they were developing Windows 10. They were using a Scrum-like process for the user interface, and they were using a more waterfall-like approach in terms of building out the infrastructure of the operating system. Or we could just do different approaches. We could look at what are the best practices for what we're trying to do. So during our planning, maybe we use an Agile approach. Maybe even at the portfolio level, we're doing lean portfolio management versus our big predictive planning processes. During our build, maybe it makes sense to do waterfall, maybe Kanban because we're just managing tickets, maybe Scrum because we want to force those regular deliveries in that cycle. And we could think about what makes the most sense for the deployment of our software. Do we want to deploy things all at once or big increments? Do we just want to continue to create a continuous flow of Kanban? Makes a lot of sense if we're doing maintenance type work, small pieces going in whenever. Scrum, maybe we want to deliver every 2 weeks, or maybe we're mature enough and have the capabilities to deliver whenever we need to, deploying on our business needs. One of the companies I teach for is a big aerospace defense company. And I'm teaching courses for folks that are managing these huge, hundreds of millions of dollars, billion-dollar portfolios. And quite often the VP of project capabilities will come and speak at lunch or at the end of the day. And I stole with permission this slide from her. I've never seen a project fail for something new. You, as the PM, as the portfolio manager, the program manager, may not know that mode of failure, but someone you know does. And so think about it for a minute. How many of us have been really surprised when we've seen that project tank? We bid it too competitively. We assumed the sun would never go down, it would never rain. We didn't track our risks or our issues. And our projects fail. But we knew they were going to fail, but we're like, oh, where'd that come from? So that brings me to my fourth point, which is to be successful in project management, we need to be more intentional. We need to be more thoughtful, more deliberate in terms of what we're doing. So as I said, I love discipline Agile, and DA has I think there's 6 or 8 different value statements, and these are the 3 that I love the most. One is context counts. Every project, every team, every organization is unique, and for us to be successful, we need to understand that. The next point is that choice is good. The more we know, the greater the experience we have, the more opportunities in terms of practices or tools that we understand, the more likely we will be successful. And then lastly, we want to be pragmatic in making those choices. We want to do the things that make sense for that project rather than just doing something because that's our standard, that's the way we've always done it. So what does that look like? what does intentional hybrid project management look like? So I think one of the most important things we want to do is start out, before we even start, in the chartering process, or even before that, is making sure we're asking the right questions. What are we doing and why? Peter Drucker would ask people, what business are you in? What are we trying to accomplish? And Simon Sinek talks about starting with why. And that the amazing companies, Apple, which all my products are Apple products, is a great example of that. Because Apple talks about how does it differentiate itself from every other computer or software manufacturer. And I can't tell you how many times, I'll go in and I'll talk to someone there and say, oh, we've got a project in trouble. I'm like, what are you doing? Oh, we're building this system. Why? Not sure. Because the boss said. When we start with the why and we really drill down on that, we know what we're trying to achieve. We know what that end state is supposed to look like. And it's not about launching a system or building a building. It's what are we trying to do in terms of creating a capability or functionality or something for our users or our customers. Next, let's leverage existing practices and processes. There is so much out there in the domain of project management. We don't need to make things up just to make things up. Use something that makes sense, that's tried and true. PMI, the PMBOK guide. And the PMBOK guide gets updated every 4 years. So it's always getting better. VA, SAFE. Sir Isaac Newton, done as much as I've done. I've accomplished as much as I have because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And all of us have that same opportunity as well. There's a lot out there, and a lot of it's just free for our use. One of the things that we find to support that point is that maturity matters. This was out of the 2018 Pulse of the Profession report, the Pulse of the Profession that just came out at the end of last month, even more focused on maturity. The more mature we are in our project practices, the more likely we are to be successful in what we do. And so with that, we want to make intentional choices. We want to think through how we're going to execute our project. How does that fit within the context of what we're trying to achieve? How is this project different than what we've done in the past? So use the things that work. Be pragmatic in making those choices. Number 4, measuring and tracking performance. Sounds pretty simple, pretty obvious. So last year, PMI did this big, huge study of what contributed to project success. And they talked about having basically a net promoter score, called a net project success score. But it's basically your standard net promoter score. Scale projects on scale of 1 to 10. If you're a 9 or 10, then it was good. 1, 2, 3, subtract it out. And they found 3 factors that contribute to success. Will increase your project success sevenfold. 1, defining the success criteria up front. Makes sense. Having a way of measuring our projects and our project performance. And then while it seems patently obvious, clearly it wasn't, which is that we need to track our project performance in order to make sure that we'll be successful. Number 5, we want to improve continuously. We'll implement go back to Deming. We're going to plan what we're going to do. We're going to execute. We're going to see how it worked, and then we're going to adjust. And the whole idea of doing an Agile retrospective is to make those adjustments and to benefit the projects that we're doing. And let's face it, no matter how often or how many times we've worked with the same project team, there's always things we'd really like to tweak. Let's do those things. And so when I think about projects and the foundational elements of the things that make for successful projects, it's not that huge, exhaustive of a list. First, I think we need a charter or a document that's like a charter. I don't care what you call it. And the primary value of a charter is it clearly defines what our objective is, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and what does success look like. It's that simple. We know what the goal is. We want to have a project management plan and a real robust project management plan. And it's not based on the number of pages of the plan, but the project management plan is our opportunity as the project manager to define how we're going to run this thing. And if we recognize that our projects, or most of our projects, are hybrid, that project management plan becomes even that much more important, because predictive has a standard set of practices. Scrum has a standard set of practices. Hybrid, who knows? So we need to define what we're going to do. We also want to get clarity around the scope and the timeline. And the reason I talk about getting clarity around scope and timeline is because that's what our customers typically care about. What are you going to do? What are you going to give me? And when am I going to get it? I'm a big fan of visualizing the work, Kanban boards, roadmaps. As human beings, we are keyed onto seeing patterns, not numbers. And so there's lots of things that we can do to visualize our progress. And there's actually an article I wrote about a year ago on that. We also want to manage our risks, our actions, and our issues. And we want to be robust in how we do that. It's not the fun, exciting part of managing a project, but it is the foundational work, because when things start slipping through the cracks, it's because we're not doing that. I can't tell you how many projects I'm like, get to the end of the project, oh, we can't deploy. How come? Well, because we didn't order the servers. I'm like, well, where's that documented? Well, we've been talking about it for a few months, but we never really bothered to write it down. We also want to simplify the process. Again, for those of us that work in large enterprise environments, or for the federal government or with the federal government, there's a lot of waste in what we do. I spent 14 years in telecom. For a project, we would produce 4 documents. Went to work for a big financial services company, 75, 95. And we were actually more successful when we produced fewer documents. We want to empower the team. And empowerment is a word that we throw around. So to me, a very basic, simple definition of empowerment is people get to make decisions. We push decision-making down to the lowest responsible level. And when we do that, people actually make really good decisions. And I've been in environments where, if we want to approve a release or a requirements document, it needs to go all the way up. And you ask the person at the bottom, they're like, that makes no sense, but I don't own it. When you own it, you do the right thing. I also think we should focus on creating consistent, repeatable processes versus having rigid standards. Without process, every project is a new leaf, and we're always starting over again. It's sort of like Groundhog Day. So we want to have processes that are consistent, that are repeatable, but we can also improve on what we're doing. So the big takeaways: 1, be pragmatic. Do the things that make sense. 2, recognize that all the projects are hybrid. Pretty much all of our projects are hybrid. And therefore, what are the patterns of practice? What are the tools that we want to employ on our projects? 3, think about those different patterns. Where are we? What are the things that make sense for what we're doing? 4, be intentional. Be deliberate and thoughtful about the decisions we are making on our projects. And finally, honor the craft. We're all here. We're here to learn. Project management is not easy. If it was easy, then we wouldn't be going to these kinds of seminars and these symposiums. Respect the craft. Continue to improve, continue to expand your experiences, and entertain questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks for watching. Check out our website, pm.umd.edu, for incredible free professional development opportunities. There you can find courses, events, articles, and more. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with someone who might like it, because learning grows when we make it a conversation. See you in the next one.